Recently, a mysterious cosmic warrior named Rogal was revealed to be behind the destruction of Krypton. After a brutal battle that destroyed the bottled city of Kandor and the Fortress of Solitude, Supergirl managed to banish Rogal to the Phantom Zone. Meanwhile, Clark's estranged father, Jor-El, from Krypton, came back to Earth to offer Clark's son and Jor-El's grandson, John, a trip across the galaxy to help him find his way as a man. Lois agreed to chaperone her son, but during the battle with Rogal, the only communication device Clark had to keep in touch with his family was destroyed. Now that the battle is over and the villain is gone, Clark has only one thing on his mind. He has to find his family. The problem is, it's a rather big galaxy out there, and he has no idea where he's going. It's unusual for Superman not to know what to do, but he's never actually been in a situation like this before. He encounters the Dominators, an alien race that invades other worlds, heading straight for Earth, and using his incredible powers, easily wipes the alien fleet out. It's a polite reminder of where Superman is actually needed. He has faith in his family and their ability to keep themselves safe. He's just alone. Number 6, Superman. So next up is an interesting one. All 3 of the Superman-based Brian Michael Bendis comic book series were voted on by fans to be one of the worst of stories for 2018. And out of them, Superman and the miniseries Man of Steel both won. Now that was a bit surprising, I have to say. Let's get into it a little bit and talk about how I feel of this series overall. Because, unlike the Man of Steel miniseries, there's a lot that the Superman series has to offer. The artwork by Ivan Reis is consistently impressive, and Bendis does some really cool things. The entirety of the 2018 publication revolves around one story arc, basically following up on all the stuff set up in Man of Steel. With Earth being accidentally projected into the Phantom Zone, and Rogal, who's still there, ultimately challenges Superman and Earth once again. So I can already see where people came from when voting on this thing. If you don't like Rogal, well, he's front and center of this story, and this pretty forgettable villain doesn't exactly improve much in these first 6 issues that we see of him going up against Superman once more. There's a lot of annoying aspects to his character. I'll leave it open as to whether or not his backstory will be interesting, because we haven't really gotten into that much, but it seems like Adam Strange knows of him at the very least. Yet my problem with his character is that he's just so strong and bland that he comes across as this vague, ethereal force. He looks and feels a lot like Doomsday, both in terms of sheer power and ability. But there's something about the way he sort of effortlessly and non-lethally takes down all these Phantom Zone prisoners just so that he can recruit them into his army that feels like Rogal can just do anything. That's how Bendis is writing him. And while there's some really good moments in these first 6 issues, I really like when Zod gets involved in this story. That whole final issue of 2018 is really awesome, with the first chunk of it basically taking place in super speed time, and Superman having seconds to figure out what to do, and his actions, he correctly identifies, will basically determine the future of the Kryptonian race. It's some pretty good stuff that would have honestly been better if Bendis' writing had been a bit more polished. This whole series is really lacking in that regard, and where I can start to see why people voted for this to be one of the worst series. Each and every one of these 6 issues has some sort of line in it that really flubs Superman or gets something fundamentally wrong about his character. And it's stuff that Bendis is normally good at, but here just feels weird. Take the final lines of the first issue, which are presented as a series of weird sentence fragments that just don't work and feel like they're playing up the drama of what is already a dramatic moment and doesn't need to be played up. The Earth is inside the Phantom Zone. That's very awkward and forced, and the dialogue feels unnatural, which is unusual for Bendis, who at the very least is usually good about keeping his dialogue feeling breezy and natural. The problem is that Bendis is usually only good at writing one type of dialogue, a sort of fun, quippy character, very similar to how Joss Whedon writes characters. So while he's good at doing characters like Spider-Man, it feels unnatural with Superman. Another really strong example of Bendis' writing being pretty weak is when we flash back to a conversation that happened between Superman and John. It's a really good conversation, at least on paper. John is frustrated about what some of the newspapers are saying about their family and wants to lash out, and Superman is correctly explaining how that would be wrong. But the way that Bendis writes that dialogue feels really unnatural and weird. Superman explains it to John in terms of him wanting to pop off Batman's head all the time, and that he has to control himself in order to control his anger against Batman. That's just not how we've seen Superman talk to his son in the past, and not really how Superman operates in general. There is anger there, and he has to control that anger, but not like this, and that's not how I understand Superman's relationship with Batman. There isn't this barely controlled contempt here, at least outside of the DCEU, so it feels really wrong. Kind of glad Bendis went ahead and aged up John a little bit, because clearly he's not good at writing John as a kid, at least from what we've seen here and in the Man of Steel miniseries. And to be honest, when we line that all up and consider it along these lines, yes, I did enjoy aspects of this series, but that dialogue is really awful and holds this comic back in a big way. This is one of the lesser comic book stories that came out this year. Maybe not the absolute worst, but it is pretty bad. There were parts of this comic I really liked. There's a big twist in issue number 6 that I won't give away here, but was really clever, made me laugh, and had big implications for the overall outset of this story. It was surprising in a good way. A natural twist on the story that I really liked and didn't violate what we'd expect out of any character. Superman has this big moment and then something happens that ultimately changes those plans in a significant way, and there's nothing the Man of Steel can do about it. That's a great ending to a first story arc in a comic book series, and a pretty strong one that left me a little reluctant to say this is one of the worst stories of the year. But around all of that stuff is a lot of awkward dialogue. The Flash is written in a way that's super annoying, for example, that makes me think that Bendis needs to work on how he writes some of these characters, because the Flash is the sort of character that a writer like Brian Michael Bendis should be good at writing. Instead, he comes across as super airheaded and unable to process the situation around him. Meanwhile, the Martian Manhunter has a really touching conversation with the Man of Steel at one point. That's done fairly well, although it relies on the same bit that Bendis relied on in a different conversation Superman had with Lois Lane in Action Comics. So I have a lot of mixed feelings about this comic, but now that I've sat down and done my review and gone over all my thoughts and gone over what's wrong with this series, I have to say, stellar artwork and interesting concepts aside, yeah, this is pretty bad, and I would agree that this is qualified for the worst of list. Logos simply isn't that interesting. Bendis is straight up not doing that great a job writing for Superman, and on the whole, this is a series that leaves a lot to be desired. So let me know what you guys think in the comments section below. Thanks for watching, and if you like Comic Island, be sure to check out our Patreon page in the video description. And finally, don't forget to like, subscribe, and keep reading comics.